Okay, so rough agenda then. So we're going to first look at what social engineering is. This one should work now. Yeah. So we're going to look at what social engineering is. We'll look at some famous social engineering cases. We're then going to look at social engineering techniques and a basic framework which a social engineer might use to mount an attack and plan for an attack. And once we understand how a social engineer is going to, or social engineer is going to perform an attack, we can then look at ways of protecting ourselves and our companies from those attacks. It goes without saying, no, social engineers generally when they act, they are breaking the law and trying to do bad things. They're trying to extract information out of people and companies or do effectively corporate espionage. That stuff's illegal. I'm not condoning any of that unless you're a pen tester. Generally, people who do social engineering and get caught end up like this person here and end up in prison, spend most of their time bending over picking up soap for the next 10 years. So that's not what you want to do. So it's a huge subject. A lot of social engineering is all about psychology. Obviously, we can't cover all of psychology in 1 hour. That's impossible. So this is really about the art of the impossible. So it kind of gives you a good feel of what's involved. So let's start off with a little story. So we've got a poor person sitting there in the middle of the night in tech support doing the night shift. Suddenly they get a phone call from a panicked executive called Tom. So Tom phones up and he's like, I'm in real trouble. I'm a senior financial VP. We've got an investment meeting tomorrow, and for the life of me, I can't get back into my machine. I've been locked out. So tech support guy goes, okay, I'm trying to help you. Have you gone through the password reset portal? Of course I've gone through the portal. It doesn't work. I need my password reset now, otherwise I'm not going to be able to attend this meeting tomorrow, and it's about a massive investment. Tech support person, wants to be helpful and help the person out. So he says, okay, I can reset your password here manually. What's your username? What password do you want? Okay, I want monkey27. So he resets the password. Tom confirms that he can access the system. He's very happy. He's very thankful to the tech support guy. They hang up, and our tech support guy is sitting there thinking, he's done a good deed for the day. He imagines himself running down the hallway, high-fiving all his employees for doing such a good thing, helping out an executive VP. But really, this VP wasn't a real VP. It was someone posing to be a VP. And what they've managed to do is to take over an account by forcing the tech support person to reset a password. This is a very simple, contrived example, but it kind of gives you an idea of how someone has used pressure, or kind of like a fear then relief. They've tried to exert fear and pressure onto a person to comply. So, what is social engineering? So we can briefly define it as the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest. And generally, when we talk about social engineering, there's 3 main types which we might come into contact with in our day-to-day lives. So the one that we all probably know about is phishing. This is where people send emails that look convincing, trying to get you to perform an action. It could be from a bank, so someone posing as a bank logon page or a logon email. And it could be from any company that you might be a customer of. Or it could be, our friendly Nigerian prince trying to give you $10 million. Another type, which we might be common or might be familiar with, is called Vishing. So it's very similar to phishing, but it's done over the telephone. So has anyone ever had those calls where someone pretends to be from Microsoft and they want to help clear a virus off your machine? All you have to do is give them access onto your system. They'll log on and clear it for you. That's a common Vishing attack, or someone from a tax office claiming that you owe the tax office money and trying to get you to hand over money over the phone by, making you scared. If the tax office phoned me up, I'd be quite nervous. And the other type is impersonation. So impersonation is where someone is trying to take on the persona of someone else to try and con you into doing something that's not good for you. And it's impersonation is the one that we're going to focus on mostly in this talk. But just to give some statistics about how bad some of these different attacks are. So there's a website called socialengineer.org where I got these stats from. And most of these are US-based stats, which is kind of good because we're in the US at the moment. But 90% of all email is spam. I'm sure we can all attest that from our inboxes. And phishing represents 77% of all social-based attacks. So phishing emails are still one of the biggest and most common ways in which someone's going to try and scam someone. And most of these emails, or 88% of them, generally rely on you clicking a link onto some kind of spoof website. So some examples of phishing attacks. So we've got people asking for help. So someone might have taken over an email account, or they might be spoofing an email from one of your friends, claiming that they need some money to help them out. It's quite common. Fake charities asking for donations. This one's very common when there's natural disasters. So when there's a lot of earthquakes or flooding, you sometimes get a lot of fake charities springing up, trying to get you to donate money to relief appeals. But a lot of them, unfortunately, are fake. Asking for information, so people spoofing bosses or executives in VPs to try and get you to disclose information about projects in an office. Asking for verification, so getting you to log on to your bank or pretending to log on to your bank, where people could be sort of skimming your log-on credentials. So these are sort of common phishing attacks. So some of the techniques that they might use for phishing is you'll have an email or a website with typically very good English and good grammar. They'll use logos and maybe style sheets from different websites to make the emails look convincing and the sites that you ultimately click onto look very convincing. So it uses good web design, good storytelling, and a good sales pitch. They may also mention real people's names in a lot of these emails to try and convince you as well. So if it's an email within a company, they might start quoting other people that work within that company to make it seem legitimate, as well as using real facts about projects. And we'll go over this when we talk about information gathering, about how people can extract or gather information about companies and projects and staff as a way of being, coming across as being legitimate. So Vishing, again, as we said, is about telephone-based attacks. And these represent about 2.4, well, in 2012, 2.4 million customers were targeted for phone fraud. And 2.3 million customers were targeted for phone fraud in just the first half of 2013 alone. These are fairly old stats, but they do kind of prove a point that the problem is getting exponentially more serious. And back in when these stats were sort of worked out, they reckon that the average business would lose about £42,500 per account that could be potentially compromised. There's some examples of phishing, so tax office scams, tax office phoning up saying you owe them money, tech support scams, and also bank account fraud, where people try to pretend that they're from your bank and try to get you to hand over key information. So impersonation is another type of attack. So this generally involves a lot of ID theft and is very common in the workplace. So 80% of all thefts generally involve people disabling or bypassing controls. And that's quite an important statement because, as a company, you might invest hundreds of thousands of dollars on intrusion detection systems, firewalls, and all that good stuff, which is good. But if you have members of staff who have access to these systems, you can then go and disable or bypass any of these controls, and that becomes a problem. Doesn't matter how much you spend on security at that point. And generally, 88% of all reported assets stolen were personal data. So personal data is incredibly valuable. So social engineers come in different shapes and sizes. You have your stereotypical hackers who might try to do this. You've got penetration testers, who are probably the only really legitimate form of social engineer. So if your company hires a pen testing company, not only are they going to do sort of more software-based attacks, they're probably going to do people-based attacks as well to try and gain access into the company. And of course, you've got your common things like spies, identity thieves. Disgruntled employees is also a very big problem for losing data in a company. A class recruiters are social engineers because generally they're trying to get you to do something you don't want to do. Governments and sort of salespeople as well. But can anyone think of another type of person that's very good at manipulating or influencing you? Children. Especially my kids, they can pretty much bend me around their little finger and get me to do whatever they want. So why do people do social engineering? Because it sounds like quite a lot of effort, but people do it because it consistently works. And generally, in any network or organisation, the people inside the company are going to be your biggest vulnerability. And it also offers a path of least resistance. So if you're trying to get passwords for a particular system, you could go down there trying to steal database tables and brute forcing them, or you could try and manipulate someone to reveal information about a password, which is probably going to be a bit easier to a trained social engineer. So common types of attacks then are generally against customer service staff, delivery staff, so having someone actually turn up at your company wearing a convincing set of overalls with an ID badge, a bunch of parcels under their arm, is a very common way that someone's going to try and access a company. Phone calls and via tech support, as we sort of looked at in the first example earlier. So some famous social engineering cases that you may have heard of. So a guy here called Kevin Mitnick. Has anyone heard of Kevin before? So he was quite a high-profile sort of wanted person back in the day, back in sort of around 95. He spent 5 years in prison for his crimes. And one of the things he did was he managed to, or when he was younger, he managed to figure out how to ride the LA bus system for free by going through the bins of the bus company and pulling out, documents with various bits of information which allow him to effectively dupe the bus drivers into giving him free access to ride. He also used to steal lots of software off of computer systems from DEC computers back in the late 70s. And in the end, he was charged with 14 counts of fraud and 8 cases of unauthorised entry, which he spent 5 years in prison. These days, though, he is a reformed character and he's a security consultant who helps companies protect themselves from people like him. 3 of the books that he's written I highly recommend. They're very good reads. So we have The Art of Intrusion, The Art of Deception, and his personal biography, which is Ghosting the Wires. So if you're interested in these sorts of things, these are very good books to read. Another one which people have probably heard of is Frank Abagnale. So he was born in 1948, and he was a confidence trickster, cheque forger, and sort of general imposter. And during his career, he took on 8 different identities, one of which was an airline pilot. So he was actually in the flight deck of Pan Am flights for quite a while, which is quite worrying. But he also managed to impersonate a doctor and a lawyer, which is also quite worrying. And he also managed to escape custody twice. He was quite a slippery fellow. Most of you may have heard of him from the film Catch Me If You Can, with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. It's basically the story of Frank Abagnale. Fantastic film if you've not watched it. One particular frame from the film there, where he's walking through an airport, posing as a Pan Am pilot. Another one which probably everyone's heard of is Charles Ponzi, who came up with the Ponzi scheme, which was a way of doing mail fraud using international reply coupons. You buy these international reply coupons and then you could sell them as exchange them for stamps, and the difference basically meant you made a profit. But to make this more profitable, he tried to encourage other people to do it, and he kind of formed this kind of like pyramid scheme, which was going really well for him until a reporter started investigating his tax affairs, and then the entire thing sort of crumbled. He ended up going to prison. So the common theme from all of these is that they always get caught in the end. So how do social engineers go about doing this? So we're going to look at a basic framework for social engineering. And there's kind of 4 steps or 4 areas that we want to look at. So we have information gathering, pretexting, elicitation, and manipulation. So first of all, we've got information gathering. It's sometimes called OSINT, or open source intelligence. But basically what this means is you're trying to find information about your targets or the companies that you're trying to target. So it takes a lot of preparation. You're not just going to do a quick Google search and find everything you want, and then that's everything you need. This will take quite a lot of time to gather information about the people that you want to target. One very common way and effective way of doing it is dumpster diving, literally where you're going through people or companies' bins looking for information. This could be useful because lots of people still don't shred personal documents in the home. So if you throw away any bank statements or any financial documents, insurance documents, medical prescriptions, literally any piece of information which may seem completely innocuous to you as an individual is actually a small piece of information that could be useful to a social engineer. If your recycling bin is full of whiskey bottles, that kind of gives a certain impression to a social engineer as well. If you go through the bins at companies, you find an absolute goldmine of information there. So, for example, if you're working on a project, maybe a waterfall-based project, where you get given a big design document, and then your project manager gives you an updated design document, what are you going to do with the old one? You're probably just going to sling it in the bin. It's of no value to you anymore. But if anyone managed to pull that out of the bin, imagine how valuable that is to someone outside the company. It's an almost accurate design document about a system that you're building. The other common ways of getting information are using social media, so Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Things like Facebook, if you post a public post, photo or anything, next time you go and post on Facebook, unless you explicitly tell it to go back to being friends only, and I think it still does this, it will automatically post it as public. So if you post lots of stuff public on Facebook, obviously they just need to look up your Facebook profile and they've got lots of information. Twitter is a public, it's an open stream of consciousness about your thoughts if you're a heavy Twitter user. So you can get a lot of information about someone's personality, what they're into, maybe political biases, what sports teams they're into. This is all useful information. LinkedIn's probably the worst one because it contains your career history, probably details of what projects you've worked on, the companies you've worked for. From that, someone can easily go and find out who your colleagues are, and they can work out if they're working on the same projects as you. So it's an absolute goldmine of information for putting a dossier together about a person. And then, of course, you've got Google and Bing as well, and other search engines. Another way in which people can get information is by somehow getting a keylogger installed into a company. This can be easily done by putting them onto USB keys, which people pick up and plug into their machines. Keyloggers, record all of the keys that you type. So as you're typing in a password, that could be put into a text file and sent off to a remote FTP server somewhere. Or another form, or another similar type of software is remote screenshotting tools. So you can have this thing installed on your system. It routinely takes screenshots of what's on your screen and just post it off as JPEG somewhere. So if you've got important information, like personal information on your screen, that could get captured and sent somewhere else. Another way of information gathering is good old shoulder surfing. So how many of you use public transport to travel to and from work, like the train or a bus? Yeah, a few people. How many of you catch up on emails or do a bit of work when you're travelling? Quite a lot of people do. Or you might reply to personal emails. Just imagine how easy it is for the person sitting behind you on a seat just to peer in between the seats and see what's on your screen. It's a very good way of sort of seeing what someone's doing. Social engineers generally know who their targets are, so they can, by and large, make sure they're in the same place at the same time as their target. They might not even have to engage with the person. They can just sit near them and see what they're doing. When I was, before I went self-employed and I was working for other companies, I used to be a leader, so I managed quite large teams. And where I sat, the partition behind me was effectively a glass wall, so people could see into the office where I was sitting. So, if I was doing personnel documents for people, like appraisals or one-to-one reports, I had to make sure I went into a different room to type those up, because if someone was standing behind me, they could see exactly what I was typing. So it's exactly the same principle. Of course, you could be creative and get your grandma to knit you one of these, which is a privacy scarf. Partially solves the problem. You can actually buy these. I saw them on Etsy once. Someone was selling them. They might look a bit silly in the office, so. That's information gathering. It's basically finding out information about your target or targets using open source tools. So web searches, social networking, shoulder surfing. So once a social engineer has gone and got all the information that they need and they've got a good picture about what you are as an individual, where you work and what you're working on, they'll then go to the next stage, which is called pretexting. So pretexting is it's the practice of presenting oneself as someone else in order to obtain private information. In other words, acting. You're going to be pretending to be someone else. Probably a lot harder than what it sounds. You have to come across as convincing, which is not going to be easy for everyone. So some general principles then. So planning and research leads to more success. We talked about that with information gathering. You're probably going to spend quite a lot of time on that stage. Shared interests with your target makes success more likely. If you know that your target is a fan of Manchester United from the UK, so soccer teams, or you know that they're into similar interests as you, that's going to make it easier for you to strike up a rapport with your target. As I said before, good acting definitely helps. If you come across as looking awkward and a bit shy, and maybe a bit introverted, you're not going to come across very convincing when you're trying to pretext someone. You want to keep it simple. So you don't want to try and overcomplicate your ruse, otherwise you'll get found out and you'll trip up and make a mistake. You also, when you're talking to them, you want to try and make sure you use information that doesn't require any verification. So if you say something that they don't quite believe, and then they're going to go and sort of try and verify that information afterwards. That could make things a bit awkward with your plan. In terms of planning, you need to actually know what you aim to achieve. Are you trying to get passwords out of them? Are you trying to get details about a project or a system that's being developed? You might be trying to do some corporate espionage. You need to plan for different reactions that stray off the happy path. Like in software development, we always test the happy path first, and then the failure cases don't always get tested. It's exactly the same with this. You might have a complete happy path scenario in your mind of how the perfect pretext is going to go, but if the person doesn't react in the way that you think they're going to react to, say, a particular question or a particular act, you need to be able to plan for that in advance as best you can. And generally, just being friendly might be sufficient. We're very personable social creatures. If someone's just genuinely being nice to you, that will get them to open up, and that might be an easier way of performing the pretext. So another good definition of social engineering is it's the clever manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust. And the key word there is trust. You're trying to get someone to trust you, which is easier said than done. Okay, so the next stage then is elicitation. So elicitation is the act of getting information without directly asking for it. So, if you're trying to get an admin password from someone, you're not going to walk up to them and say, what's the password? Because that's going to kind of give the game away a bit. So you're trying to coerce someone to give you some information without directly requesting it from them. So generally this is about exploiting human nature. So most people, by and large, want to be polite, and people also want to appear well-informed. There's nothing worse than, if someone asks you a question and you say you don't know, or you don't have the answer. It kind of makes us feel a bit awkward as people, especially as technical people. So because people want to appear well-informed, they might be more willing to divulge information to make themselves sound informed, especially for less experienced members of staff, so recent graduates or more junior people in a team. People also want to be appreciated. Everyone likes a good pat on the back. So if part of your pretext and elicitation, you actually give a lot of praise to someone, you're going to make people feel good about themselves, and they might be a bit more willing to divulge information in the future. And generally, most honest people don't like to withhold information or lie, so you can kind of use that to your advantage. So the key to success then, obviously this makes it sound very easy, but obviously this stuff is difficult to do. But it's understanding how to communicate with people, being a good communicator. But you need to be able to adapt your communication style to fit the situation. So you need to be very good at reading the room. It's a bit like a poker player. They get to read the reactions of people's faces and then plan accordingly. It's exactly the same with elicitation. And to do this, you want to build a bond with your target. So when you go in and do your pretext and try and get the information, you're not just going to meet them for the first time and then hope to be done within 10 minutes. This whole process could go on for days, weeks, months, or even years, depending on what it is you're trying to do. It's also very important to stay in character in your pretext. And I read an article once about it, but I can't remember where the article was from, where someone was performing a pretext. They were trying to basically be friendly with someone of the opposite sex. But they were married, so they had to make sure their wedding ring was off. But the ruse kind of slipped up a bit, because one time when they went back in to engage with this person, they forgot to take the wedding ring off, which kind of gave the game away a bit. You imagine that, if you're trying to get friendly with someone, and then suddenly you turn up with a wedding ring on, that's going to get them to ask a lot of questions and make it quite difficult and awkward. And a lot of elicitation is around how you use effective questioning techniques. So if we look at 3 different types of questioning techniques, we've got open, closed, and leading are the 3 most common ones. And you can use different types of questioning techniques to try and obtain information from people. So if we look at open-ended questions, so an open-ended question encourages a full, meaningful answer using the subject's knowledge. So if we have an example, so can you tell me about the relationship with your father? It could be answered in hundreds of different ways. The relationship with my father's pretty good. Oh, no, it's not very good. It's a bit tense. How do you feel about the election candidates? It doesn't direct the person in how to respond. People can just be completely open and tell you who their favourite election candidate is and what they feel about them. A closed question, on the other hand, kind of gets you to answer more of a yes or no style question. It's very closed in its response. So, do you get on with your father? Yes, no. It's a very closed, simple response. Who are you going to vote for? Again, it's a very direct question, which you can only really answer one way, or in a very simple way. And then the final type is a leading question. And a leading question is where you're trying to subtly prompt a respondent to answer in a certain way. So we've got the examples here. So do you have any problems with your boss? So it's kind of indicating that maybe you do have a problem with your boss, and what is it? You might not have a problem with your boss, but when someone asks you that question, you may think, well, actually, they make a really crap cup of tea. It kind of pushes you in a certain way to answer. Another example is, how fast was the red car going when it smashed into the blue car? So it's kind of leading you to think that the red car was actually at fault when it hit the blue car, but actually it could have been the blue car at fault. But the question kind of leads you down a particular way of thinking that actually it was a red car that was at fault. So when you're using questioning techniques, you can think of it like a funnel. So you start off by asking quite open questions, which is generally how you might be in more sort of casual conversation. But then as you sort of narrow down to getting the information you want, you might start asking more closed questions so you can get more direct responses. And if necessary, you can start asking leading questions to kind of funnel the conversation in a particular direction. So we've looked at pretexting and elicitation. So pretexting is taking on a persona. And elicitation is using that persona to extract information. As I said, this is stuff that, it's not quick. It could be things that go on for weeks or months for you to actually sort of build up that bond and trust with a potential target so that they can actually open up and give you the information. Generally, the more serious information you're trying to get from someone, or the more consequences to them divulging information, it's going to take you longer to actually build up that bond and trust with them for them to open up and give you that information. So the final sort of stage in that process is manipulation. So when we talk about manipulation, there's kind of two areas we can talk about. There's influencing and manipulation. So influencing is influencing someone to change their mind in a way that's good for them. So if you're out drinking with friends, and one of them happens to have his car keys with him, you might try and influence him to say, let's not, don't use your car, let's get a taxi home. That's influencing someone in a way that's good for them. Whereas manipulation is getting someone to change their mind in a way that is not good for them, because you're manipulating them. So if you think of it in terms of win-wins and win-loses, an influence is a win-win for both parties, whereas manipulation is a win-lose. So it's good for you as the manipulator, but it's bad for the person that you're manipulating. So it's kind of a subtle difference between the two. Now, manipulation is generally bad. You don't want to manipulate people. It's not a very nice thing to do. If you're a social engineer, then this is your bread and butter. This is one of your primary tools in trying to get information from people. So we looked at a definition of social engineering earlier where we said it's the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest. So really what we're talking about is the act or the art of manipulation. And there's hundreds of different manipulation techniques out there. You can literally buy massive textbooks just on manipulation in psychology alone. But we're going to look at a few sort of very simple cases, just to give an example. So one is using fear against someone, and it's commonly called the fear and relief technique. This is where you use fear as an initial tactic, and then you offer immediate relief to that fear. So a good example here is tech support. You get a call from someone in tech support. You've detected a virus or a ransomware system potentially on your machine that's going to encrypt all your files. We need to act quickly to remove it from your machine. Just confirm your network password so we can log on and we'll remove the ransomware. So the initial fear is, oh crap, I've got this thing on my machine that's going to screw all my files up. But the person on the phone is now taking advantage of the fact that you're probably in a slightly panicked state, and they're going to try and offer you relief straight away before you have time to really think about what's going on. So that's called the fear and relief technique. Another one is using guilt against someone as a way of making them comply. So if you imagine through the open source intelligence or the information gathering stage, if you manage to find out someone's dirty laundry or some dark secrets about someone, you could actually use that against them. Maybe you found out they're having an affair with someone in the office. Well, the threat of you telling their partner is, it's a way of using guilt against someone. If you know someone's got a drinking or a drug abuse problem, again, you can use that information against someone by divulging or threatening to divulge information. So using secrets as blackmail. So, for example, I need you to copy these files for me, help me, or I'll tell your wife, husband, partner, or boss about your affair, drinking, or drug problem. Delete as applicable. Another technique, which is actually really common and gets used against people more times than you probably realise, is the foot in the door technique, which is where you ask a victim to do a very small request first, then once they comply, you can then move on to a larger request. A very good example of this is that if you have a beggar or a homeless person on the street, sometimes they'll stop you and ask you the time. So you stop, look at your watch, it's 4:15. As soon as you've complied, they'll then go in and then ask you for some money. Exactly the same technique. It's called the foot in the door technique. So door-to-door salesmen, or salespeople might use this as well. So they'll knock on the door. They'll do some very polite chit-chat of, how's the weather? If it's a sunny day, the weather's very nice, thank you. And then, you've done the initial comply, and then they'll go in and then try and go in with their direct sales tactic. So we talked a lot about how social engineers work, and we've covered, a brief kind of framework for how a social engineer will try and do impersonation. So what can we do to protect ourselves from it? And actually, the mitigations from a lot of these things are quite straightforward. So we're going to look at personal mitigation and corporate mitigation. So when it comes to directly attacking or targeting people, social engineers will try to generally go for more junior people within a company. So junior staff, might be fresh out of university in your first job, you're very eager to please. So if someone phones you up and you're pretending to be a senior VP in the company, then they're probably going to be very willing to help you. Contractors or consultants in a company don't necessarily have the same level of vested interest in an organisation as a permanent employee, so they might be easier to manipulate, along with admin staff or other sort of support staff. So if anyone phones you in the office and you don't quite know who they are, like in the example we gave at the beginning, first thing you should always do is try and ask for ID. If you don't recognise a person on the phone, try and identify them on some kind of company register and then say you'll call them back. So if someone says, it's Tom from finance, and you don't recognise them, most companies generally have some kind of online directory on the intranet where you can look at all the different staff, especially in a leadership team. So say you'll call them back, try and look them up, and then call them back via the number that's on the intranet. So watching for out-of-character questions. So if you're having a conversation with someone and then suddenly they ask you some questions which just feel a bit strange and a bit out of character, those sort of questions that kind of make you a bit like, that's a bit weird. That could generally be a sign that something's not quite right, and you may want to then question their motives or report it to a manager or someone higher up in the company. So giving too much information for a small request can also be a warning sign. So if someone's asking you to do something very simple, but they're giving like a big rambling backstory as to why they need the information, potential warning sign. But also, if you're trying to do something for someone and they're trying to distract you at the same time. So, for example, if you have someone phoning you up and you're a call centre agent for a bank and they're asking you to transfer, an amount of money from one account to the other, they might try and distract you and try to talk to you while you're doing it, just so you're not completely on the ball when you're doing the transfer. So it's a way of partially distracting you so you're not fully concentrating on what you're doing. Which is a bit worrying because sometimes when I phone the bank, you try to be polite and you make a bit of chit-chat with the agent on the phone. So I don't do that now. Don't let guests roam free in the building. Always ask for ID. If they can't provide ID, call security. So I actually, when I worked for a large pharmaceutical company in the UK, all of the buildings had these big metal turnstiles you had to go through, the sort of turnstiles you get at football stadiums. So you had to sign in with your card, go through the turnstiles. One thing you quite often see staff doing, which is a bit naughty, is like if someone had forgotten their card, they'll get their friend to go through and then just pass the card back through and then they swipe themselves in. So anyway, I went through the turnstiles once and someone who claimed to be an executive at the company said they'd forgotten their card and could I pass my card to them to let them in. I said no. I said they had to go back through to reception. I even offered to escort them to reception, which they declined, but I wouldn't let them in. Turns out that person was actually a high-up executive at the company. I just didn't recognise him because it's like, 60,000 people worked at this company. You're not going to know everyone. But, I was still right to do that. I didn't recognise the person. Being an executive in the company, they should know better than to ask someone to give them their card to sign them in. It's kind of a stupid thing to do. So it doesn't matter who it is, if they haven't got the ID or they haven't got their way of getting into the system and they ask you to get in, don't do it. Just report them to security or take them to reception. USB thumb drives, an absolute bloody nightmare. So if you find one on the floor, don't plug it in. A lot of companies I've worked at actually, on the laptops and computers they assign you, they disable all the USB ports on the machine. They do it for a good reason, because they don't want you plugging stuff into the machine, which could have malware on it. Does anyone have that with their companies, where USB ports are disabled? One person. A few people, okay. Whilst it's inconvenient, it is actually quite a good thing for a company to do. Because you imagine, an attacker buys a 256 gigabyte USB stick. They cost a reasonable amount of money. If you see one of them on the floor, you're going to think you're having a lucky day. But it's very easy, as software professionals, it's very easy to have executing code on those, which can install keyloggers onto your system or any other kind of malware. So just don't plug USB thumb drives in. Don't take them home and plug them in. Just don't do anything with them. Bin them. Always be aware of what you're saying. This is quite an important one. So who here, quite frequently, maybe on a Friday after work, you go to a bar or somewhere with your colleagues? Anyone do that? I used to do that all the time. Chances are, when you're in the bar with your colleagues, you're going to be talking about work, because what else do you generally talk to your colleagues about? You could be having a go at your boss who's done something stupid. You could be talking about someone who's done something daft on the team. You could be talking about something on the project. So now, just imagine that a social engineer knows that people from a particular company go to certain bars after work. All they have to do is go to that bar and sort of sit near the people that they're targeting. They don't even have to do anything. They just have to sit there and listen. Just imagine how much information you might accidentally divulge without even thinking about it. Not with malicious intent, you're just chatting to your colleagues. But that information is valuable. So at home, you should always shred documents. Does everyone shred documents at home? Yeah, a few people do, that's good. Bank statements, anything with your personal details on should be shredded if you're going to bin it. Because as we said before, it's very easy for someone to go through your bins and you'd be amazed what you can find out about someone by what they throw away. Going back to our friends' USB thumb drives, don't store confidential documents on them because they're bloody easy to lose. If you lose a thumb drive and someone does pick it up and plug it in, which they shouldn't do, but if they do and you've got design documents or important documents about your company on there, sales figures, financial data, again, that's all very valuable to someone. Use drive encryption on your laptop. I think these days pretty much all laptops have some form of drive encryption on them. BitLocker in Windows, and Apple Macs generally encrypt the hard drives by default anyway. It's important because if you lose your machine or it gets stolen, you don't want people to access the files on the hard drive. Again, be aware of who's looking over your shoulder. If you're doing some company work or working on a PowerPoint or a Word document or writing code on the bus or in a restaurant or a coffee shop, just be aware of who could be sitting around you. If you're in a coffee shop, you might want to sit with your back away or with the screen facing away from anyone. Obviously, you always lock your machine when you step away from your machine. It means someone can't access your machine, but it also means your colleagues can't send jokey emails from your email account. But also, educating yourself. When you come to talks like this, looking at some of the books that I'm going to recommend at the end are just good ways of educating yourself. I always find it's interesting to understand how social engineers operate so that you can actually try and learn how to protect yourself. That's kind of the whole premise of this talk. But it is a fascinating subject, and I guarantee you, once you start reading some of these books, you'll start getting addicted to the idea, and you'll just read more and more about it. Okay, so corporate mitigation. So what can companies do if they're not doing these already? So one good thing to do is identify information assets that are most valuable in a company. sometimes employees don't know what they can or can't do with a document. So if you've got a load of documents on SharePoint, you know, is this information okay to be consumed by the public? Is it top secret? Generally, staff aren't going to know unless you tell them. So one thing you can do is you can get all these different assets and you can put simple information classifications or little, like, you know, coloured marks on the front pages so people know what to do with documents. So if it's got a green thing on the front cover, it means this is okay to release. It could be, you know, a sales brochure or anything like that. Amber or yellow could be release only with authorization from a manager or leaders. And red could be confidential, do not release. And it sounds very simple. It's just putting a little coloured mark on the front of a document, but it very clearly expresses the intent of what you can and can't do with that document. You know, if it's got a red on it, you're not going to stick that on your laptop and take it home with you, especially if you work in a government or military regulated environment. So our good friend corporate security policy documents. You can almost feel people silently groaning when I say that. So has anyone had your IT policy people give you these documents you have to read about, you know, what you can and can't do with documents, encryption policies and all that sort of stuff? When I say, oh, it's dull as ditch water to read, they are important. And I think a lot of the mistakes companies make is they just give them to their staff, expect them to read them and kind of process the information in their minds. But that doesn't happen because, you know, who reads them? So as a company, you want to think about different ways in which you're going to try and disseminate this information to your staff so that they do understand it. And, you know, generally the common ways of doing it is computer-based training systems that you might have, where you have to, you know, pass a little quiz. You might routinely make your staff do these. One bank I worked at in the UK, we had to go through these documents once every 6 months and pass a test on a computer system. It's irritating, wasn't very fun, but it was important. These documents are actually important because it expresses the intent, you know, what you can and can't do with certain pieces of data or assets in a business. If you work for a smaller startup or a very small company and you don't have things like this in place, there's a good website here on sans.org, where there's a load of template policy documents that you can use to get you started. You won't necessarily use those documents as they are, but it gives you, you know, 80% of what you might need to think about for different regulated environments. So companies should keep software updated and patched. I'm preaching to the converted here because we're at a software development conference. Patching software is important. The reason software is patched is because companies like Microsoft and Apple or anyone else are closing vulnerabilities. If you don't patch your software and there's known vulnerabilities in a certain version, then someone could have some malware to take advantage of those. So you need to do that religiously. Back to the idea of shredding documents. Obviously, it's not going to be very practical to have lots of those little mini shredders in every office. But, you know, you can get confidential waste disposal companies to come into your company where you have those big, you know, wooden bins where you put your documents in, and then they're securely destroyed in bulk on site. If your company doesn't have that, then it's a good thing to recommend because it's a good way of just destroying any confidential information. So when your project manager does give you that new design document, don't throw the old one in the regular bin, just stick it in the confidential waste bins and then it will get shredded. So you never want to assume that your company is either too large or too small to be attacked. Anyone is a potential victim. If your company has something of value, which you would hope a company does have something of value to be in business, then that's going to be of value to someone else outside the business. So just understanding how to protect yourself and your organisation is very important. So an online bank I worked at, we had a particular incident once where someone was phoning up from outside the company trying to pretend to be from a different business team within the organisation. So they phoned me and they phoned about 6 other people in IT. Now they had quite a lot of information about some of the systems we were building. They knew some of the lingo that we used, some of the terminology. They knew about some of the server names, which was quite interesting. So they're actually coming across as being quite convincing. Because we all had training very similar to this, it kind of felt suspicious to us. It wasn't an internal company number, so we knew not to divulge any information, and we knew who to report it to within the company. But it's a good example where someone was, you know, they were targeting multiple different people with different requests to try and build up a bigger picture. Okay, so a quick summary. So we said that social engineering is the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest. We looked at the fact that social engineers can come in different forms. So penetration testers is probably the only non-illegal version of it when we think about it, because pen testers are paid to try and penetrate companies. They're going to do that either via standard, hacking style, Troy Hunt style hacking, or they're going to try and get in via, social engineering stuff. People do it because it consistently works. People are a vulnerability. I know that sounds a bit harsh and a bit horrible, but people are a vulnerability in a company. They are a weak link. And hackers do this, or engineers do this, because it is a path of least resistance. So if you're trying to get access to a certain set of passwords, you can either try and get it from the people or junior members of staff, or you've got to go through the hassle of trying to get database tables and then trying to crack passwords with Hashcat, and that's hard. It's much easier to potentially try and get it from a junior member of staff. So we looked at a basic framework that a social engineer will go through. So information gathering is all about collecting information about your target, whether it's a person or a company. Pretexting is taking on a persona. So when you try and engage with this person, you're not going in as yourself, you're pretending to be someone that you're not. Then elicitation is the act of using that persona, but then trying to get information from someone without directly asking for it. So you're trying to coerce someone to give you some information. And then we looked at some basic manipulation techniques. I mean, there's hundreds of manipulation techniques out there. We just looked at a small handful. And we've also looked at some basic personal and corporate mitigation techniques. I think you can all agree the actual mitigations aren't that complicated. It's not some weird voodoo that you have to do to protect yourself from it. A lot of it is just good common sense, but sometimes you just need to explicitly think about what's going on around you when reading a situation. So if, like me, you find this subject fascinating, there's some good resources for you. So I did a short Pluralsight course with my friend Lars Klint. It's one of the play-by-play courses where we kind of cover what we discussed today. So it's a good refresher, although NDC does put the videos out as well, so you can watch those. These 3 books, if you're just looking to lightly learn about the subject but not go too deep, then these 3 books are absolutely fantastic. They're all about the size of a standard novel, so it's the sort of thing you can read on holiday. I did. My wife was horrified that I was sitting there reading a book on social engineering and not the Dan Brown latest novel. But they are very good books. They're entertaining reads. They're not too technical. They're not difficult. They're just informative and fun. If you do want to go deeper, then there's a book here called Social Engineering, The Art of Human Hacking. Now, this book really does get serious. It's about 1,000 pages. It's a beast of a book. So if you do want to go deeper on the subject, I highly recommend this book. It's a really good read. One thing we didn't have time to go into was the use of body language. The body language you use as a social engineer versus actually reading people's body language. It's another fascinating side of the whole subject. If you want to dip your toes into it, then there's this book by Joe Navarro. He's an ex-FBI interrogator, an FBI agent. And this book is all about how in the FBI they would be able to read the body language of a potential suspect to tell whether they were lying or not. Lots of very fascinating things, like, if someone's sitting at a desk and they're steepling their hands like that, that's a sign of confidence. If someone's, rubbing their hands on their legs, that's a sign of being nervous. If you're sitting at a table and you've got your legs directed towards the door, which you can't really see because there's a table here to see whether anyone's doing that, that means you're uncomfortable and you want a quick escape. Those are some examples of the things he talks about in the book. Really good stuff. So thank you for coming along. So my name's Stephen Haunts. I do independent training and I do a lot of courses for Pluralsight. I've got 18 courses in the library. So I've done things like this, blockchain principles and practices, where I teach developers about the principles of blockchain. I've got lots of different courses like that on there. I also write a lot of books. So there's a Gentle Introduction series of books that I've written, which are all available on Amazon, along with one on social engineering. And you can also find me speaking a lot at different conferences around the world, because I love coming and talking to other developers. So I hope I've not made you too paranoid. So I hope you're not all at PubConf feeling like this guy here with the tinfoil hat on, worried that anyone who's talking to you in the bar tonight is actually trying to get information from you. But with that, thank you very much for coming along. If you could all remember to put a voting card in at the end, that would be very good. I've been informed by IT that the yellow and red cards are actually broken. It's only the green cards that work. So just bear that in mind. And thank you very much, and I'll see you all at PubConf. Thank you.